Zawnstar has an excellent YouTube channel, which is linked below. I'm a proud member of the Crocodile Army, which he calls his subscription base. I've met him in person several times, and we've even broken bread together. He and I don't agree on everything, though, and you know something? That's okay. I enjoy hearing opinions and explanations with which I disagree. They give me an opportunity to sharpen my convictions or change my mind for the better. I find an increasing societal problem with so many people wishing to lock themselves into echo chamber safe spaces where they don't have to experience the harshness of dissenting opinions. That ironically includes a healthy sum of the anti-PC, tell it like it is folks on the far right. You don't have to unfriend, unsubscribe, or cut someone out of your life, even if you disagree with them about many things or a few big things. Someone can still be your friend and a generally good person, even if you don't walk in lockstep with the majority of their opinions. It's a shame I feel the need to mention that, but I'll get back to specifics of polarization later. I received political comments on almost every video I've posted since Trump's election, even though all of those videos were apolitical pros never mentioning the election. So I suppose that on the precipice of Trump's inauguration, I may as well comment on my country's election and status, the primary motivation for which you have Zawnstar to thank or blame. He voted for Hillary Clinton and insists that we all should have done the same, otherwise we're responsible for Trump's election. I don't think he'll mind me sharing this clip of his rationale on that point from his most recent video, which is also linked below.
In that election, think of everyone as having a slider. -1 being a vote for Trump, 0 being not voting or a vote for one of the many third-party candidates who were clearly never catching fire, and +1 being a vote for Hillary. In each state, if the total is less than 0, Trump wins. The millions of people who voted for Obama previously and then switched that slider from 1 to 0 for this election all want to claim that they had no culpability for the result. Claiming it's not your fault when you move the slider from 1 to 0 is not accurate. We're all responsible for our choices, and you share some culpability for the results, just as would be the case for me if Hillary had won and we all died in World War III. That was actually the most laughable claim I heard from liberals who didn't vote for Hillary, by the way.
Zawnstar's claim here dismisses third-party voters as a waste because those candidates are unlikely to win. You can't vote for them because they aren't likely to get enough votes. It's that catch-22 that is responsible for our current anti-progress two-party system. It's why candidates now have the luxury of only needing to appeal to battleground states. Hillary Clinton knew that California would vote for her over Trump in the general election. So just shut up and give her your votes, California. She has other things to do. Well, actually, Hillary kind of had that attitude about the entire country, so maybe she's a poor example. Trump knew that Texas was going to vote for him over any Democrat, so he need not bother doing anything to earn the votes from Texas, while a progressive oasis like Austin gets swallowed in red. If you want to hear me ramble more about third-party voting and why I think it's justifiable, I have a video on that linked below as well. I find Zawnstar's explanation for why third-party voters are culpable for Trump's election to be unconvincing. In his example of a sliding scale, I could say the exact same things he said, but place a 1 value on Gary Johnson or Jill Stein and a 0 value on Hillary, and we'd be in the same position. Because, you see, if everyone who voted for Hillary voted third-party for, say, a candidate in favor of not waging war, or whose campaign was not shrouded in scandal, or who was not in Wall Street's pockets, we'd be preparing for the inauguration of someone other than Trump right now. And we might even have our first woman president. Even without changing Zawnstar's scale, third-party voters are not to blame for Trump's victory nor Hillary's loss. The onus is on a political party, including primary voters, to field the best candidate possible to win the general election. The onus is then on the candidate to convince the swing voters, or even those predisposed to other parties, to change their minds while not losing the voting base he or she already had. Voters are then to fill their ballots with the candidate they feel will be best in the Oval Office, not to automatically select the candidate based on who they think has the best chance of winning. Voting is not betting on a racehorse where your predictions for who's likely to win determine where you spend your vote. If that's the case, there's no need to even allow what's considered an unpopular party in the race at all. Even using Zawnstar's scale, this may sound crazy, but the only people directly responsible for Trump's presidential victory are Trump voters. Trump needed votes to win. It's absurd to blame people who voted but did not vote for Trump for his victory. Zawnstar argues that a third party voter is culpable for what happens under a Trump presidency, just as he would have been for any atrocities caused by a Clinton presidency. While I find the basis of blaming yourself for 4 years of someone's political mistakes just because a vote that you cast for them on a single day in November to be absurd, it's especially strange that Zonstar's analogy ignores that he voted for Hillary while third-party voters did not vote for Trump. The fair equivalent would be to hold third-party voters responsible for what their third-party candidate did if he or she won. Otherwise, I can blame Hillary voters for Trump's mistakes because if they'd all voted for Johnson or Stein, Trump wouldn't be in office. Sounds silly, right? Zonstar also took a shot at the Bernie or bust crowd from the left, as many have done. While I agree that citizens should make it their personal responsibility to vote for the best available candidate, and writing in someone who has conceded isn't much different than not voting, there's another group who should carry significant indirect blame for the Republican victory that I've never heard mentioned. They aren't third-party voters, and they're a much larger group than the relative handful of disenfranchised Sanders supporters who couldn't bring themselves to vote in an election of such lost opportunity. I never hear blame cast on the Hillary or bust crowd, who internally ruined the Democrats' chances starting with the primaries. It was no secret that Hillary was a standard establishment politician whose best promise was to keep things how they already are during what was clearly a change election. She horribly misread the status of the country at the time, which is something our current president got right and played to so well when he defeated her the last time she ran for president. It was no secret that she had major career flaws during her time as Secretary of State that would be easily exploited by any political opponent willing to take the gloves off. It was no secret that the majority of Clinton's campaign was to hinge on her name recognition, and whether you like it or not, she was happy to garner any votes she could just so that we could have our first female president. But the attitude was Hillary or bust, and the DNC put all their chips on her. Of course, if you need another group to shoulder some indirect blame, you can point your finger at the mainstream media for underselling or underreporting on the impact of Bernie Sanders throughout the entire Democratic primary, while granting Trump an endless supply of free coverage. Speaking of the primaries, despite Sanders' lack of name recognition, funding, and media coverage, along with his insistence on running a clean, issue-based campaign, and the ever-growing discouragement from the undemocratic superdelegates of the Democratic Party, he was beating Trump by larger margins than Hillary in multiple general election polls for nearly every state where Clinton was winning or even with Trump. Moreover, Sanders was even winning polls in states where Clinton was losing to Trump. If Democrats were truly as fearful of a Trump victory, the smart thing to do would have been to vote for Sanders in the primary. But the DNC and most of the Democratic voters didn't want to hear it. It was Hillary or bust. And they didn't decide to take up the argument that Trump was so dangerous that everyone had to look over the other Democratic flaws, like Hillary's glaring flaws, until after the primary, during which they were so confident she would win, practically by default, that they couldn't fathom taking her primary opponent seriously, even the one who outperformed her with independents in battleground states against the Republican nominee. After all that happened, and Hillary lost, what did most of the left do? Did they eat some humble pie and look back at all the common sense reasons that their candidate couldn't beat a reality TV host with literally zero political experience, despite all her funding, experience, and name recognition? No. As a heavily left-leaning independent who voted for Barack Obama twice, it pains me to admit that no. The overwhelming majority of Democrats with whom I speak or to whom I listen in the media or whose articles I've read have done no such thing. If you didn't vote for Hillary, whether you voted for Trump or a third-party candidate, they've had no interest in asking why and listening for a real answer. There's no honest desire to learn from their historically massive blunder. It's so much easier to just throw a toxic label on people who disagree than retreat into unwarranted tears. If you didn't vote for their sacred cow, it can only be because you're a racist, misogynist, and a sexist. You just hate Hillary because she's a woman, even if you voted for Jill Stein, because she wasn't going to win anyway, so you're not allowed to support her. It can't be because your political values are more aligned with the Libertarian Party, because Johnson wasn't going to win anyway. Therefore, voting for him was the same as voting for Trump, you sexist. Speaking of which, it's impossible that you voted for Trump because you were so sickened by the conniving, corporate-owned cronyism of our establishment politicians that you were desperate enough to believe that a clown with too much personal wealth to be bribed was a better choice. It most certainly can't be that you had anything against Hillary's policies or behavior, because let's face it, if you dislike a woman, it's because you're a sexist. If you dislike anything a black man says, it's because you're a racist. If you don't like Islam, it's because you're an intolerant Islamophobe, and so on. That brings us to the biggest problem I see with American culture right now. I see it on every side of every protest, in the media, in comment sections of news articles, YouTube videos, social media posts. We've become so polarized and unnuanced that most of us either drown ourselves with digital distractions to get away from it all, or we retreat into our echo chambers. Not only that, but each side does so while feeling ethically superior to their dissenters via, overgeneralized labels. We've lost the willingness to have open and honest conversations with one another where we actually listen instead of waiting for our turns to shout. And maybe that's why so many people were willing to vote for a buffoon like Trump. As soon as a guy said he was considering voting Republican, for every one person who was willing to ask why and have a genuine conversation with him, 10 to 15 others fired from the hip to call him an ignorant, racist, misogynistic pig. It's no better than the alt-right refusing to engage their dissenters with meaningful arguments and instead dismissing them all as beta-cuck Muslim apologist social justice warriors the moment a single left-leaning opinion is offered. As someone who tends to live in the gray area between the aisles, I find myself increasingly struck by the trash that the left and the right spend most of their time throwing at each other. I've been called all of the labels mentioned here, and somehow, despite being generally open-minded to lean in either direction if logically persuaded, being written off as a pre-canned insult has never changed my mind. Maybe if we want the political and social landscapes of this country to be better in 4 years than it is now, we need to stop relying so much on our politicians, stop demonizing our neighbors based on their skin color or their opinions, and start talking to each other.